Today's video is sponsored by SpecOps. Verify callers and stop hackers while enhancing your service desk security options. Visit them today for more details at specopssoft.com. So on today's episode, I'm going to check out what's new and cool in Entra ID's conditional access. So stay tuned. This is a good one. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Andy here. So nice to see you. I really do appreciate you dropping by. As you can see, I'm in the Microsoft Mechanics studio this week, so something special. And we're going to be talking about what's new and cool in Entra ID. Now, this is a piece of technology, of course, that has constantly changed and evolved over the years. And I'm super glad to say that there's some super great new features that we're going to check out this time. Now, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you know what to do. Click on the subscribe button up there, ring that bell, and come and join my learning community. And if you'd like more, well, why not sign up to my Patreon channel right here, and you'll get access to full courses, monthly Zoom calls, and a lot more. Okay, so without any further ado, let's jump in and check out what's new and cool in conditional access. You know, Entra ID is just one of those products that's constantly changing. So for admins, it's super important that you come into the what's new area here in Entra ID on a regular basis and just really get an idea of what's going on, because otherwise you might get a bit of a shock. So if you're into Copilot, of course, most people are nowadays, you'll like the announcement that Security Copilot has now been embedded into Microsoft Entra. So if you're planning to do an investigation, you're using some of the security tools like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, or you're using Sentinel, then this is going to be a welcomed use there. In addition, by the way, just to mention that on the subject of the Admin Center, the Copilot for the Microsoft 365 Admin Center has now been released. Just remember, though, that it is an additional charge, I'm afraid. Also, the Microsoft Entra PowerShell module is now being made generally available and is currently being deployed to many tenants out there. So watch out for that for more details. And also just a reminder that the MFA enforcement in the Entra Admin Center is now coming into effect for all admins and is going to be rolled out to everything. In addition, just to mention that in Windows 11, with the latest version of Windows 11, you will need a Microsoft account or a workplace account to use Windows 11 in the future. It's going to be a requirement, I'm afraid. And you know that that is going to be for things like multi-factor authentication and also for taking things like passwordless onwards and upwards. So moving into identity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to click onto the protection tab, and today we're going to focus on conditional access. Now, to be honest, conditional access can be got in identity protection, Microsoft Intune. You can get access to it here in the protection pane, and also if you go into Identity Secure Score, this is definitely a place that you should come in regularly. So also remember that with conditional access, you can have a dedicated conditional access administrator, and you can configure this in the role groups, your specific admin roles, where, if you've got Bob, Bob, he's a specialist in conditional access and you don't want him to have full global admin rights, then you can go ahead and you can make that there. So you'll notice that here you've got access to conditional access, identity protection, of course, and you've also got the Identity Secure Score. So it's really good to come in here just now and again, check out your Identity Secure Score. You can see that it makes some or a number of recommendations, and it also shows you how to actually go ahead and implement that as well. So really useful if you want to improve your overall identity score there. Now, I've talked about this in the past. So identity protection requires a P2 license, whereas conditional access only requires a P1 license, which is perfect for small businesses. So if you're a small business using things like Small Business Premium, then this is going to be really useful for you. So just to mention, by the way, that Small Business Premium customers can also upgrade to the Entra P2 plan. And I think it's a very low cost, so that's also something that you might want to check out this month. So what have we got in conditional access? Well, conditional access, as you know, is such an important component in Microsoft's Zero Trust kind of model. And here there are a few things that you need to do in order to get your conditional access up and running correctly. So first of all, you probably want to go into named locations. And out of the box here, you can see that we've got a number of kind of default options that you can use. Now, you can create a location either by geolocation. So for example, a country. So for example, if I said, I'm going to go in here and type in Norway, and I said, yeah, I want Norway to be a trusted location, of course, I can go in and I can configure that as well. Again, I can give it a name. So again, I'll just call this one Norway here. And again, I'll go ahead and save that. You can also include unknown countries and regions as well. Now, how do you want to configure the lookup method for this? So again, it can either be through an IP address, whether it be IPv4 or recently introduced IPv6, or it can be determined by a country's GPS coordinates, which can be very useful if you're traveling around, you're connecting to Wi-Fi and so on. So that's the one I'm going to choose in this example, and I'm going to click on next. So one of the first things that you do is you create kind of named locations, because named locations can essentially become what we call trusted locations. So you can also add in IP address ranges here. So again, you can, if you've got like the Bergen office or the New York office, and you can add the IP address range. When you add that range in, again, it can either be IPv4 or IPv6 range of addresses. Another thing that we have here is you can configure multi-factor authentication for specific IP addresses. And you can see it takes you in here into what we call per user multi-factor authentication. So per user multi-factor authentication kind of goes back to the old kind of Windows or Microsoft 365 days. If you want to enforce this on a particular user, of course, it can also be on things like resources as well as groups as well. So again, multi-factor authentication on a per user basis, quite useful. So you can see here, very, very useful. Again, you can also switch on various preview features in here as well. So first things first, you definitely want to set up a named location, because this can be set up later as a trusted location. So for example, you might say, I don't need phishing resistant multi-factor authentication in the New York office because we're already in a trusted location. Next, something that you definitely want to configure is a terms of use. So a terms of use is such an important component in a company's acceptable usage policy. So it prevents misuse or a misunderstanding on what the service is for. Also, if you've got guests or business partners connecting to your organization, you can put in here, this is the terms of use, and you can specify, typically if I click onto new terms here, I'll just call it T's and C's. So just put it into T's and C's here. Typically, you bring this in through a PDF file. So if you've got terms and conditions, simply just browse for that PDF with those terms and conditions, select the default language, give it a display name, and then of course you need to determine, you can also add multiple languages in, by the way. You can require the users to expand the terms and conditions. I'm sure you've seen that a few times, but also require the users to consent on every device, and that is important. So although they've selected it on a iPhone, for example, they've maybe not connected to it on a Windows device as well. So that's useful. Also you can also expire consents as well. So you can put in an expiry date for the consent, and you can then specify whether it's going to be annually, biannually, quarterly, monthly, and so on. So that's a really nice feature there. Okay, so I like that. I'll just switch that off there. Okay, so the other thing that we've got is you can also, based on this terms of use, you can then configure a specific conditional access policy there. So as well as showing you the latest features, what I wanted to do is give you kind of best practices as well. And I definitely think the terms of use falls into that category. So definitely check that out. Okay. So coming back into conditional access then, what we're going to do is just have a look at some of the recent additions and some of the updates. You've got this new feature, policy snapshot, so just keeps you up to date with what your policies are currently doing. You can view that. Also, I really kind of like this as well, the fact that you get this policy summary. So again, at the moment, I've only got a few users and I'm just assigning it a single user, which brings me to a very good best practice. When you're deploying conditional access policies, I would kind of scope this to a single user at first, test it, and test the user's machine, test what the environment's like, then deploy it to all of your users and so on. Bearing in mind that you very, very easily could lock yourself out here, especially with things like MFA, so be very careful with admin accounts there. Also, it shows you how many devices have been covered, and again within the last 7 days, and you can view those device summaries here and things like non-compliant. So if you're using tools like Intune, it's very easy to find kind of which devices are actually non-compliant within your organizations. So again, also shows you what new features are. Again, I've just mentioned those. So in terms of having a look at some of the conditional access settings, key things then, terms of use and also VPN connectivity. Bearing in mind that with VPN, I can go ahead, I can create a new certificate here for VPN, very useful. So if you are going to have users connecting to a VPN, this is absolutely critical that you do this. So it will go off and it will actually create a certificate that can then be stored on users' devices. And so when the user authenticates, this can be, it can there identify that user's device. So that's useful. Just before we go into things like the actual policies themselves, just a couple of things I want to mention. You can also go into what we call authentication strengths. And an authentication strength, out of the box, you get things like multi-factor authentication, you've got passwordless, and you've also got these new phishing resistant credentials. So however, you are quite within your rights to go in and you can create new authentication strengths, and you can give it a name. So for example, this week I'm in, let's say, Oslo. I'll call this my Oslo authentication strength, or Oslo AS, and I can now specify what strength of multi-factor authentication am I going to support. So for example, phishing resistant is either FIDO, or its new name, of course, is passkeys. And passkeys are now either device bound, or they can be bound to a user account, or let's say, for example, your Apple keychain or your Azure Key Vault or something like that. Again, passwordless, if you've got the Authenticator, if you're using the Microsoft Authenticator app, which is great. And then, of course, you've got multi-factor authentication. However, some of these multi-factor authentications, you can see that they're still relying on things like passwords. So multi-factor authentication, honestly, I don't think it's the strongest method. If you scroll right down, you've also got the new QR code. I covered that recently in a section. So again, you can even add that. So this is great if you're on in a call center, you basically scan a QR code, and then it will ask you either combined with multi-factor authentication or something like a PIN code. So again, I'm just going to select that, and you can see I've now created my own set of rules or authentication strengths, and I can then use that in conditional access as well. So now that I've done that, let's have a look at the actual policies themselves. So creating policies, of course, I can go in, I can create a new policy from scratch, and I can also use a template as well. Please note, recently we've got the new what if feature that's updated. Now, just to mention something that's concerning me, just before I create a policy, is identity protection. Identity protection adds an additional layer of security, and we have the user risk policy, and you also have a sign-in risk policy. Now, I have a problem at the moment with the user risk policy. So, for example, if it detects a user, so a highly confidential user is potentially malicious actions are going against that user. So, for example, things like impossible travel, it's detected that you're logging on from an unfamiliar workstation. What do you want to do? Well, with identity protection, one of the options was to require a password change. No, no, no. This is potentially a backdoor into an organization. I was actually at the MVP Summit last week in Redmond, and we actually were talking about this, and Microsoft are changing this. So rather than require passwords, again, it will require something like a phishing-resistant credential. So watch out for that coming. Likewise, sign-in policy require things like multi-factor authentication. Again, super useful. So coming back into conditional access, then I'm going to come into policies. And do I want to create a policy from scratch, or do I want to create one from a template? So again, recently we've had a whole bunch of new templates coming in here. So for example, things like protecting the administrator account require multi-factor authentication. One of the things I would definitely say though is have an account without multi-factor authentication, but with an incredibly long password or complex password, and we call this a break glass account. So the worst case scenario is if you lose access, of course, you've got this break glass account to get back in. And typically Microsoft make a number of recommendations on, for example, you should have two. You check out the documentation on learn.microsoft.com. It's definitely worth looking at. So as I said, you can create these policies from these templates. I like these. They're okay, but I just feel that sometimes I need a little more control with them. So if I just flip back then to conditional access, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create my own policy from scratch. So, and here I'll get to show you some of the new features as well, by the way. So I'm going to call this, I'm in Oslo today, so this is my Oslo CA01 policy. And who do I want this policy to affect? So it's all about signals, of course. Conditional access, it's an additional layer of security. It's all about signals. So which users do you want to include or exclude? Or you can go for specific users and groups, and you can create special policies for guest accounts. So you can have, specific types of guest accounts. Now, of course, this is new recently as well, updated. So B2B collaborative users, so that's your traditional guests. But you also might have things like, if you've got a multi-tenant solution, I only want local guest accounts. I don't want the guests from your tenant or John's tenant or something like that. So you can really kind of drill down into this and make it as granular as you want. So when you're talking about guest users, bearing in mind, definitely take a look at this and be quite clear on what type of guest user you want to bring in. Likewise, again, if you're using different admin roles, so again, you've got users maybe they work from home, they're coming in and they're using PIM, Privileged Identity Management. So for example, you might have a user who is they manage user accounts, so you're a user admin. So again, you might want a specific strength of multi-factor authentication for those. Or, of course, we can just go for traditional users and groups. So in this case, I might have some users. Let's say I've got a user here. This is the sales team. So I'm going to create a conditional access policy for my sales team here. So target resources, please note that this used to be known as cloud apps, but now it can encompass different types of resources as well. You'll notice if you've got a subscription to Global Secure Access, of course, this is now available in the Entra ID pack, the additional pack that you can get. And this is like an inclusive add-on if you want this. So Global Secure Access, this is Microsoft's SSE or Secure Service Edge solution here. So what do you want to do? Do you want to manage all cloud apps or only selected apps here? So again, I can edit the filter. I can, put a dynamic filter on here, or I can select the specific apps. Now, just to mention that if you're using all cloud apps, there are some session restrictions, because let's face it, what do I mean by a session? I mean a cookie. So when a user authenticates, they will typically get a cookie, and the cookie will sit in their browser. And one of the problems with cookies is that it's potentially susceptible to a token replay attack. Okay, so if somebody manages to steal your token, they could potentially replay that token, to keep me signed in that browser token. So one of the things that we have here, especially if you're an admin, is you could create a rule for the admin portal, and then you can actually restrict that token replay. So for this demo, I'm going to choose my Office 365 portal and my admin portals. So rather than all cloud apps, of course, you can have different conditional access policies for each, but I'm going to go with that just now. And this is kind of new, actually, the fact that you can do portals. Also, some of the other portals are coming in as well. These are all being introduced very soon. So that is the first signal. Okay, so now we can go to the network. And again, if you're using Global Secure Access, that's the compliance. So if you've got any kind of network compliance rules in SSE, I don't here in this example. But I want to, if I was saying here, I'm going to create a conditional access policy that requires phishing resistant credentials, then I'm going to say, yes, I want to switch this on, but you might want to exclude trusted networks and locations. Remember those? So again, I can select here. Again, this is a relatively new feature where you can actually select which secure network. So again, I'm in Norway, so I might say, hey, I want to say, if you're in Norway or in the Oslo office, this is a secure location. You don't need phishing resistant credentials. Okay, you see what I mean? The exclusion or inclusion option. So now that I've done that, I can say, okay, so based on these users using this apps on this network, they then have to meet these conditions. Okay, so the user and sign-in risk, remember that? So again, I could come in and I could say, hey, if they are a high or a medium risk, and likewise, the sign-in risk, again, is high and medium. So just click onto that and then click Done. We also have new. This is new. So if you're using insider risk management in Microsoft Purview, again, you can also switch this on as well. So if you have users that have been elevated as a potential risk, are you going to allow that user to sign in, or do you want a little bit more security? So that can be really useful. network locations, that you can see that's just a copy from the previous one. And then you've got the client apps. Now, super important, I've chosen 2 portals. So I've chosen the web browser here. So you'll also notice it says legacy authentication. So legacy authentication is if you're using, for example, old versions of Exchange or other clients, for example, old versions of Outlook. You definitely don't want these included here, because this potentially could bypass multi-factor authentication. And then you can even do, I love this, by the way, again, this is a recent kind of addition. So you can filter for devices. So you can say, hey, I want to include or exclude specific devices. So I could say, hey, device ownership. And I could say device ownership equals personal devices. So I want to exclude personal devices here, or include them and so on. And you can even say, hey, I want to add another expression. And you can even create a conditional access policy that says, hey, this manufacturer, let's say, so the manufacturer equals, let's say, Dell. And you could then say, add an expression. If the model number, I'm sure you see where this is going, equals or contains, or the device ID equals or contains, let's say, XPS. So you can see it creates this syntax rule here. So essentially you could have a conditional access policy, and this is super important for security, that basically only allows these device types in, only with these device IDs, only from this location, and so on. You get the idea. Okay, so again, this is a great layer of security. And then filter for devices. Authentication flows, this is new as well. You definitely don't want authentication flows on sensitive devices. That means that if a user logs on from one device, that they can then log on to any other device. So if somebody's got like a token, they could potentially replay that token. So it's definitely not a good idea to have token authentication flows there. All right, so those are the conditions. Those are my signals. So now we come to the grant. So based on those conditions, am I going to allow or block access? So am I going to require multi-factor authentication or require a specific authentication strength? So, and you can see here, look at that. There is my Oslo authentication strength that I created earlier. Now, again, require the device to be marked as compliant. So if you've bundled this with Intune and it's a corporate device, then the last thing that you want is a jailbroken device coming in. Again, require hybrid. So if you've got a hybrid join device, require the approved app. So you can, it's got to have a list of approved applications. And also you've got things like app protection policy as well. So for example, you might not want the user to be able to download a file or cut, copy and paste or print or something like that. So again, I'm just going to select that at the moment. And then the final part then is being able to control the session. So in here, you can say, I want to, again, use app control. So again, you can block downloads from this device. It might be a personal device or something like that. The sign-in frequency. Now, earlier I had the option of all cloud apps or just specific apps. And I mentioned that some features might not work. So you can see that some of these features, it often can't tell the difference between one cloud app and all cloud apps. For example, a token is an authentication token. So sometimes all cloud apps, you'll get different settings here. So what have we got? Sign-in frequency. So do you want periodic re-authentication? So you can specify, how many hours. So if you're in a bank, you might want to force that bank teller to re-authenticate every hour or every couple of hours. Likewise, persistent browser session. So, and again, you can see here that this is it won't allow a persistent browser session because this feature only works with all cloud apps rather than a single cloud app. I love this. This is what we call CAE, or Continuous Access Evaluation. So this is constantly monitoring all of your security components in your system, and what it's doing is it's basically saying, hey, if there are any changes, if there's anything that looks suspicious, just get the user to re-authenticate. So it sends them a challenge and the user would then re-authenticate. So again, you can set this on specific locations. This is new as well, so you can specify, I only want CAE to work in specific situations. And again, this is kind of goes in if you're using things like global secure access there as well. This is the golden ticket, certainly for admins. Absolutely switch this on. Require token protection for sign-ins. This is currently in public preview at the moment, and this will save you so much pain from an adversary in the middle attack who is trying a token replay attack. So again, tries and steals your access token and then try and replay it and log on as you. So once you've done that, we have these three options now. So I've created my policy. Do you want it to run in reporting only mode, which is the default? And what that does is it runs it in reporting only for 90 days. After 90 days, that will then switch on automatically. Okay. Now, word of warning, bearing in mind, I would definitely put it on reporting only mode. Be careful you don't include admins in some of these policies because it could be a complete nightmare. And in fact, you saw there's a warning earlier. So I'm going to create my policy, and my policy has now been published. It's now created my Oslo policy. You can also see that it's gone into reporting only mode. Now, something that's also interesting here is that it shows you how many policies are currently in play, but you'll also notice that we have these Microsoft managed policies as well, and you'll notice that there are two which are going to be enforced in the not too distant future. So it's definitely worth going in here and having a look at what those policies are and what they're going to do. Just to mention that we also have the what if tool here as well. This is a fantastic tool, essentially trying before you buy. So you can say, you know, a particular coming in from a particular IP address, using a particular app, a particular user on a particular device, what would potentially happen with that? And that's super useful, that, by the way. So that's what we mean by using the what if tool. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is, again, back in the identity portal, if I scroll down into monitoring and health, we also have the sign-in logs here as well. So if you want to see the effects of authentication, you can just click into one of these entries and you can see you get the basic information, where the user's signing in from, what device the user's using, how the user is authenticating, so MFA, for example, what conditional access policies is affecting this user. And this is quite useful for testing, but most importantly, we can also see what policies are for or will run in reporting only mode. So this is useful because if this went live, this is what would affect you. So remember that anything in reporting only mode lasts for 90 days and then slips over into 30 days. So there you have it. New features in conditional access, as well as some best practices. I hope you found that useful. So there you have it. Conditional access in Entra ID, super cool and guaranteed to keep your environment absolutely secure. Now, if you want questions, comments about anything that I've covered in my channel, of course, get those down below and I'll do my best for you. That's it for this time. Thanks so much for dropping by. I'll see you next time. Hey, thanks so much for dropping by today. Here's a couple of videos that you may enjoy, and while you're here, go ahead, click on the subscribe button and you won't miss out.